Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. Our topic today is the changing role of the business owner in planning a successful exit from your business. My name is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. My guest today is John Hraster. John founded his firm InnerSource in McLean, Virginia in 1990, and they do one thing, and they do it quite well. And that is they provide CEO advisory services. John and his team are completely focused on you, the CEO, and your business from your point of view. So welcome, John. Thanks for joining me today on Exit Readiness Podcast. Is there anything else, John, that you would say about either you or your business here at the outset?
I think you did a pretty good job. I'm always hearing from business owners, CEOs, when they want to go to the next level, be that another stage of growth or it's time to cash out and ride off into the sunset. So it's those big things that aren't part of the usual day-to-day business.
Yeah, and going to the next level is kind of what we want to talk about here today. As you know, John, what we do is we help business owners plan a successful exit from their business, build transferable value, stay in control of their exit, and leave a legacy. And at times, well, actually, it's probably typical, when we approach a business owner about exiting, the response can be something like, you know what, I really just don't have time to engage in exit planning. And then, we'll dig a little deeper and we'll find that they'll say something like, every waking moment is devoted or dedicated to the operation of this business. I just don't have time for even strategic planning regarding growth or going to the next level, let alone exit planning. And so, in cases like that, the business is still very much running through and around the business owner. And it could just be real difficult for them to take the time to plan their exit, which is typically, as you know, the exit can be the most significant financial transaction and very impactful in a lot of other ways too that we won't get into right now. But the most significant financial transaction that they may ever realize in their entire business career. So, first question for you. If a business owner such as that told you they want to maximize value, they want to get as much money out of their business as possible when they leave the business, what would you say to them, John, about their role and how it needs to change leading up to their exit?
There's a couple of parts to answering that question. I'm going to give you the small part first because it's easy, something everybody can do, something that most people don't do, and something that's critical to start down this path. And that is start to make a not to-do list. Everyone has a to-do list. Everyone has a to-do list that's way too long. It'll never get finished. When that business owner, like you were describing, every waking moment is consumed by running the company, if you think, well, at some point, I'm not going to be running the company, I'm going to sell or transfer or something, then you've got to figure out, well, how am I going to get out of here? And the business owner owning the business, most or all of it, is the case of the kind of clients we have. They need to start to look at, okay, if I'm not going to be here, what do I give up? How do I transition myself out? And the first thing to start doing is to think about, what should I not be doing? What can someone else do better than me? What can I delegate to the management team? Whatever. But start thinking that process because it's inevitable that those things won't be done by that person after the transition. So the time to start thinking about it is now. So that's a very simple thing that actually anyone can use because we are all bombarded with too much stuff to do and too many demands on our time. And to start saying no is a good practice for a whole bunch of reasons. So that's a small, simple answer. Bigger picture, that business owner probably was good at something, started doing it instead of working for another employer, started doing it on their own, and then got to the point where, okay, great, I'm self-employed, but now I've got more work than I've got capacity, so I've got to start adding capacity. Voila, now I have employees. And the the transition there is a capacity building, which puts that business owner now into a management position. Now that person is responsible for running the operations, maybe doing some of the work, making sure all the ducks are in a row and the company is viable and people get paid and so on and so forth. And then they're running this operation, maybe wearing two hats, maybe wearing one. Some businesses start out where the owner is not a doer, but a lot of businesses start out where the owner is a doer and then builds up into the manager. The next major transition from there is to get to the point of this, okay, I've got this company, I own it, I run it, and now I want to get myself out of here at some point. What do I need to do? There, it's about extricating that CEO, that business owner's activities from the day-to-day management so that they're no longer necessary. Now, it sounds to a lot of people, what do you mean not necessary? How can I not be necessary to my business? And the question I always ask is, do you want to be important or do you want to be valuable? Because if you're too important to your company, then your company loses a lot of value whenever you leave, whenever you, the owner, leaves. A buyer coming in, talks about the biggest financial transaction, a buyer coming in is going to look at this and say, well, if this person is so critical to the business, without that person, it's not worth much. And so part of what needs to be done is how do we redo the structure of the business, the organization, the employees, et cetera, so that the person who's critical to the operations is not the owner. Now, right now, they are the owner, one person wearing two hats, and I've got to disabuse a lot of people early on of the notion that, well, I'm the owner, therefore I have to run it. Well, no, you don't. You can own stock in a company and you have no say in running it, or you can run a company that you don't own. Management and ownership are two completely different things, and just because you're one doesn't mean you have to be the other. And so that concept is a big mind shift for a lot of people, but you have to start there. And if you start thinking about inevitably I'm going to be gone, how do I start transitioning myself out of here, then you can start thinking some concrete thoughts. Just because you may have those concrete thoughts and even know some of the answers doesn't mean it's going to be simple or easy or cheap or whatever. And we can get into some of the nuts and bolts about that. But a lot of it really starts with, okay, I'm making the decision. I know I'm going to be working myself out. It's a multi-year process in a lot of cases. And here are some things we need to start doing differently.
Okay, so John, building the transferable value, something that coincides with the changing role of the owner is the management team. And having a management team in place that where if a strategic buyer, financial buyer comes in and they can see, okay, they've got a next level management team in place and everything's not running through this owner. The owner foresaw and they changed their role and delegated and did all these things John Hraster told them to do in changing their role. When we go into an organization and we're doing a value driver assessment, if you will, and we recognize you really don't have a management team, or if you do, it's probably not the one that's going to take you to the next level. Do you, when you go in and you're working with the CEO, and I know that's what you most focus on, inherently you're going to getting conversations about the management team. What do you work on first? Either the changing role of the leader or owner of the company, or the management team, or is that a simultaneous process?
I'd have to say simultaneous. The way businesses run, the way people think, you can't just say we're going to do this one thing and fix it, and then we'll do the next thing and fix it. It just doesn't work that way. Because as the CEO's role starts to change, necessarily the management team has to change as well. And I don't mean they have to change in terms of different people. That may be true, that may not be true, but the management team's roles and responsibilities are changing. So it's part and part. I mean, both are part and parcel of that. It's partly the management team can. Let me put it this way. Oftentimes, the management team is sufficient without trying to replace any individual people. Now, sometimes you get to a point where if the CEO knows they're going to be leaving, someone has to fill in whatever they're doing, especially if they're still really involved in operational kinds of things. And there's different ways to skin that cat. A lot of times, though, in that, go back to that case where you mentioned, every waking moment is working on running the business. A lot of times, the CEO is just doing too much and not having the managers do enough. In fact, way more often than not, I have to tell CEOs that they are not asking enough of their employees, management team, other employees, anyone. Sounds kind of odd when you talk to any person and they say they're way too busy and couldn't do one more thing. But really, there's a lot underneath where if you start looking at, well, what are people doing, what are they responsible for, who's accountable for what, there's a lot of slack and inefficiency, which actually gets into another point that I'll mention soon. So, again, starting the transition, having the conversations with the management team, I'm changing my role as the CEO, you guys are going to have to step up, we're going to make some things do differently, I'm going to delegate more, et cetera, those kinds of conversations. And then you build. Now, take some training, take some learning on all sides, take some restructuring, but there's a way to do all that. It's also, you mentioned, or you asked about the management team versus role as CEO, and I said, well, it's kind of all of that together. There are actually a couple of other components that go into that. So it's not just those two things, because one of the things you run into very quickly is if you just tell the CEO, offload some stuff onto your management team, it starts breaking. And why it starts breaking is because there aren't the requisite systems and processes to have the business run. You're doing more than just offloading some tasks from the CEO onto other people. You're actually moving the business as a whole from sort of individual management by the individual CEO, business owner, and heroic effort from individual people. They know what to do. They've been there for years. They're loyal employees. Everybody kind of pitches in, knows some things. You're trying to move that company to a place where it's run by systems and processes. It's more stable, it's more scalable, it's more robust, there's less risk, again, for a new buyer coming in. They can see that there's machinery there that makes things work, and it's not dependent on a couple of key people who just happen to know what to do. And so those kind of systems and processes, combined with the management team, combined with the right sort of information, are the main components that enable that sort of transition. So yes, it's the role, yes, it's the management team. There's a lot that goes on inside the business as well, beyond the personalities.
Okay, so with all this change, John, and it would be significant change, first off for the owner, because maybe the owner's been doing things the same way for maybe decades, but you're talking about a change of culture here too, really, and as you and I know, that a strong culture is very important in a successful M&A or transition of a business, sale of a business, cultures matching up, that kind of thing. And, of course, for sustained growth, you need a strong culture. So how does all this change impact the culture, and how's the culture that they've worked so hard to create through the years, how do you maintain it in the midst of this big, major change?
So there's a couple of aspects to the culture. Culture is the shared beliefs and behaviors of a group of people working together in some organization. So some of the cultures that will change that you're referencing are things like, we're going from sort of entrepreneurial management to professional management. More systems and processes, a little more formality, things like that. So in some ways, that's a culture change. That's not the most important part of the culture, because that is just, we're doing things a little bit differently. It's not we're being different kind of people. We're being a different kind of company. It's kind of a fine distinction to get through in just a couple of sentences. I know we have limited time, but it sort of feels like we're a different sort of company because now we're more formal and we didn't used to be. Okay, but yeah, companies grow up and changes have happened, and the company's been growing for these years, and other things have changed, and this is just the latest step. What I'll call the core culture, the who we are, the how we operate, we're this kind of company, this is our philosophy, these are the ways we think and make decisions and direct where the company's going, that part of the culture really doesn't change, really shouldn't change. And if we combine both of these notions, the notion of more systematic approach to managing the company and this culture, turns out that if you have the right kind of management system that includes parts of the culture, including behaviors and measurements of behaviors and things, so that culture not only is identified and codified, but it's measured, it's managed, and that's built in so that any individual person arriving or departing doesn't disrupt that culture, including the owner. Because a lot of times, some companies are very culture-oriented around the personality of the founder. And if care is not taken to make sure to institutionalize that culture into the management system, then that could be a risk. The kind of thing that shows up in due diligence and interviews with the owner, by an acquiring company. And it's noticeable because people are realizing, oh yeah, that stuff is not just fuzzy, soft, nice to have. It's critically important these days.
Okay, so John, one more question here as we wrap up. What can happen, what have you seen happen, if the owner does not recognize the need to change their role and doesn't change? Again, because, oftentimes these folks have been an owner of a company for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And change isn't real easy in a situation like that to begin with, but it can be even harder to recognize it. If they don't recognize it, don't make the changes that we've talked about here today in this brief time, what can happen as it pertains to an exit?
So what can happen is, what's likely to happen, in fact, what's almost inevitable to happen, is there's a suboptimal return on the exit. So that financial transaction gets discounted a lot. Because if the owner doesn't make the changes, the owner's too important, therefore the owner is now the biggest detractor of value during the transaction, and that discount can be very, very steep. Because think about it from the buyer's perspective. I'm buying this company. This person is so key that they're critical. So I'm going to do things like I'm going to lower the price, I'm going to make an earn-out, I'm going to leave a lot in escrow to make sure that stuff gets transferred. If I'm worried about other people leaving when that owner leaves because, personality is too strong, all those things and more take chunks off the purchase price. Now, if there's anything there, sure, there would be some value and, maybe there's some profit at the end. But the big cost is if you don't do the things, if you don't essentially, as the owner, make yourself irrelevant, because to a new buyer, you probably are. And, if you don't do that, then just be prepared to take, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% less price with worse terms. That's the real cost. And then when that sort of thing starts to happen, there's a follow-on effect where if the things aren't set up properly, then the transition at whatever price goes through, and it's a not smooth transition. Employees tend to leave, and if the owner if the owner cares about the employees and how they fare afterwards, they will be doing a disservice in that regard as well. So it's just kind of, there's sort of no good outcome if you don't do what's necessary early enough to make the transition smooth. And by the way, this isn't all just about a transaction. Turns out that the exact same things you do to make a business easy to sell at the highest price are the exact same things you do to make a business last forever, grow and scale, and be even more profitable right now. And by doing the right things now, making yourself relevant, if you take off the manager hat, you're still the owner hat, now you have a lot of options. I've had clients that have worked themselves out of the day-to-day to the point where they're still in the business, and now it's an investment. They're off doing other things. So you can, have another investment, it's paying you, go on and explore new opportunities. So it's a wide range of, if you do the right things, you can end up with even more than you thought possible, and if you don't, then it's going to be a big hit.
Yeah, so there's much at stake. There's the financial goals, there's whatever value-based goals you might have, both on the personal side as well as the business side. There's legacy goals. There's a lot at stake that hinges right here on this one issue and whether or not it's recognized and change is put in place. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's a CEO listening today, John, who recognizes or maybe doesn't yet, but after listening to you today recognizes, hey, maybe I need some help with this, how can they best reach out to you?
The best way probably is email John, John, at intersource.net, intersource.net, or they can give me a call direct, 703-579-6800, extension 800. Be glad to talk to anyone who's got any more questions.
Yep, and if they reach out to me, they can get to you through me as well. I'd like to have you back at some point in the future, John, and talk more about the management team piece and draw you out on that a little bit more. Would you be open to that?
That would be great.
Okay.
Great.
Terrific. Well, thanks again for your time, your help today. I know anyone who's listening is going to find it extremely helpful. Folks, thanks for tuning in to the Exit Readiness Podcast. Check out our website, nslp.com. We've got a new service on there, the Exit Readiness Academy, where we've got some short videos that instructional, just like this podcast. And but whatever you do, get started now on your planning. It's going to take much longer than you think. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.